Good day, my dear friends. We are going to look at Mark chapter 14, verse 27 to 52, and it's study number 24 in our Mark Bible study. Study number 24 in our Mark Bible study. If you would please read the relevant passage from verse 27 to 52. I'm not going to read the whole passage now, so what you can do is pause the video and read the passage, and then make sure that you understand basically what it's all about. And then we're going to turn to the questions. So I'm going to put the questions on the screen. You can see the questions there. The first question is to subdivide and subtitle the passage. Are there any recurring themes or words within the passage? And anything, themes or words you've picked up earlier from Mark? Now, I've got the passage here which we can look at, so we can have a look. And this is the way I've divided the passage. You can divide it slightly differently if you want. And I've called the first few verses, 27 to 31, falling away. You'll see the repeated word or theme there is falling away. Falling away, falling away, disown, and disown. So those are recurring words in this passage. And then the next section, watch and pray. It's where they went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus repeatedly uses the words pray, keep watch, and then be prayed, and then keep watch and pray. And you can see the contrast here is between Jesus praying and the disciples sleeping. So the idea is that they must watch and pray. So that is the recurring theme there. And this, of course, is a theme that we find also in chapter 13 in the last days discourse, when we are told, or the disciples are told by Jesus, to keep on watching and praying. And then the third subdivision is that of betrayal. Look, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Here comes my betrayer. Now the betrayer. So you can see there's a recurring theme of betrayal. And then the last theme here is of arrest. They arrested him. That's not highlighted, so we can highlight that one. Arrested him. And capture. There's another word that is similar, capture. And you did not arrest me. So you can see there's a recurring theme of arrest. And then they deserted him and fled. Arrest, one could say, call this arrest and flight. So that's basically my subdivision. You can subdivide it slightly differently. Doesn't matter in the end, as long as you are happy with what you see. Now I'm going to keep this open here so that we can look at the questions. Question number 2. In Jesus' prediction in verse 27 to 30, this section, why does he quote from Zechariah, and why the statement in verse 28, after I've risen, I will go to Galilee? And how does Peter's reply compare with what Jesus says? What does his reply indicate that he has or hasn't understood? So I'll give you a moment to think about this. Why does he quote from Zechariah? That's actually from Zechariah chapter 13, verse 5, which says, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I've risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. It's interesting here, there are really two prophecies. The first prophecy is from the prophet Zechariah, and predicting that the shepherd would be struck. And if we remember the book of Zechariah, there's a whole lot about the shepherd. Remember the shepherd getting paid 30 pieces of silver in chapter 11. The shepherd is getting paid 30 pieces of silver, and the the sheep actually reject the shepherd. They grow tired of the shepherd, and the shepherd decides he's going to leave, and he asks for his pay, and there's 30 pieces of silver. Now we get the idea of a shepherd again, and the shepherd will be struck and the sheep will be scattered. We know from Zechariah that the shepherd there is really the Messiah, the shepherd of Israel. And then there's a prophecy by Jesus as well here in verse 28, because he says, after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. So there's another prophecy, and then there's a third prophecy. Peter says, I will not fall away. And here Jesus says, I tell you the truth, or amen, amen, I say unto you, today, yes, tonight, before the cock crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. So there's three prophecies really. Prophecy from Zechariah that will be fulfilled, a prophecy from Jesus about his resurrection, and a prophecy about Peter's betrayal. So that is why he quotes Zechariah, because he's going to fulfill the prophecy of Zechariah. And Peter's arguments not only with Jesus, his arguments actually against the word of God and against the prophet, what the prophet Zechariah spoke. So Peter doesn't understand that. Question number 3. I hope I'm not going too fast, but let's have a look at question number 3. What do verse 32 to 41 teach us about the nature of Jesus' death? This is this passage here from 32 to 41. What does it teach us about the nature of Jesus' death, and what is his attitude to it? Well, let's have a look. It says there in verse 33, he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. Those are words that are not easily spoken. One doesn't easily speak about being deeply distressed and troubled unless you are going through a severe trial. And then in verse 34, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Now, I'm sure some of you have been at this point in your lives, but so you can understand and to some degree what Jesus is feeling. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. The only difference between our suffering and the suffering of Jesus is that his suffering is for the sins of all his people. So he's carrying the weight of all his people on his shoulders. So it's not just his own personal pain and own personal suffering, but it's the suffering of knowing that he will bear the burden of the sins of his bride, of the church of Jesus Christ. Okay, so we go back to the passage, and what else does it tell us about Jesus' attitude towards it? Well, Jesus is asking for companionship. He's just asking that his friends stay with him and keep watch. And then he goes a little bit further, falls to the ground and prays that if possible, the hour may pass or might pass from him. And he says, Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. So this is a heavy, heavy burden to bear, heavy suffering that he is going to face, something which we can't really ever grasp. But we see his attitude here. Everything is possible for the Father, and he pleads for the Father to take the cup from him, but he's willing to lay down his life if that is what is required. If it's his Father's will, he will do it. And then the disciples, obviously, they don't have really an understanding of what Jesus is facing. So they are sound asleep. They are tired and they are sound asleep. And there's this contrast. There's this contrast painted between what it means to keep watch and to pray and those who are sleeping. And hopefully when we look at this passage, we will understand that our calling as Christians is to keep watch. As it says in Mark 13, when he predicts the end of the world, the coming of the Son of Man, that we should keep watch, stay alert. We should not be sleeping. Being asleep is not where we should be at this moment in time. So that's question number 3. What is Jesus' attitude? He will do it if it's the Father's will. Why does question 4, does Jesus stress to the disciples that they must keep watch? What does verse 38 mean? In what ways are the disciples contrasted with Jesus here? We've already sort of answered that question. We must watch and pray that we don't fall into sin. So watch and pray, it says in verse 38, that you don't fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. And we know that the temptation that they will face very soon is that to desert Jesus. I'm sure it's a temptation that we also face in our lives, in our Christian lives from time to time, that we also face the temptation to desert Jesus. And we need to watch and pray, because there will be times when we are confronted by our allegiance to Jesus and we may deny it. It may be in front of family members, it may be in front of friends. Sometimes we will fall into temptation when great trials come. And in our spirit, in our mind, we are strong, but when our body starts suffering or we experience pain, we may be tempted to fall away. Now, with the disciples, they are just thinking of their bodies. Their bodies are tired and they want to sleep. With Jesus, the spirit and the body is willing. He's willing in his spirit to obey the Father's command, and he's also willing to offer his body. The disciples, they are only thinking of their bodies. Maybe in their minds, they were willing to stand with Jesus, but when their body is in danger, they think only of the body, not of the spirit. So that's how they contrasted. Jesus watching and praying, the disciples sleeping. Jesus committed in body and spirit to do the Father's will. The disciples only committed to their bodies, not to their spirit. Okay, question number 5. How does the tenor of the account change from verse 41b onwards? In other words, what changes here in this, in the tone of the passage, or the tenor of the passage? Notice the words here, enough, exclamation mark. The hour's come. Look, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. See all the exclamation marks? It's 1 there, 2, 3, 4. I hope you can see that everything in this passage speeds up. There's a speeding up of everything that is happening. He says to them, enough. The hour is here. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. He's not willing to wait anymore. And it's really the climax of world history. This is really the leading up to the climax of world history, that um, where Christ died on the cross. There is nothing greater in all of history, no greater event. There's not something greater to come. When he comes again, he will come as judge of the world. It's interesting here where if we can just backtrack a little bit about the spirit and the body. Again, this passage here, uh, the spirit is willing and the body is weak. It's interesting. The great John Owen writes a book on temptation, and he says, for if you live according to the sinful nature, he quotes Paul, and he writes a whole book about this verse. He says, if you live according to the sinful nature or to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. So that's actually a quote that I was meant to bring in here. That is a very, very important statement. So when Jesus says, watch and pray so that you won't fall into temptation, the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. It's a huge statement, which Paul takes up in Romans 8, verse 13. If you live according to the flesh or to the body, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. Because those who are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. If we look at the disciples here and we look at what happens soon afterwards, it does not look as if they are led by the Spirit of God or if they are the sons of God at this stage. They are sleeping and they're falling into temptation. They will not lay their bodies on the line, despite what Peter said here. He said, even if I have to die with you, no, you won't. You will run away. So that is what is going on here. The tenor of the passage is speeding up and the climax is coming. All right, and it's the fulfillment of what we saw in verse 27. You will all fall away. It's the fulfillment of prophecy, the prophecy of Zechariah. Okay, so question number 6. Try to imagine the scene of Jesus's arrest. Who are the major participants and what do their actions show about them? And what does verse 49b mean? All right, verses 49b. Okay, so there are a number of folks here in this passage. There is the soldiers, there is Judas. We read about the betrayer, Judas, one of the 12. There's the disciples, there's the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. So we read about all these different uh, contributors to this scene. The betrayer, Judas, the 12, the disciples, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, the elders. And they come, and an army, a crowd armed with swords and clubs. It doesn't say they are soldiers, but it just says it's a crowd armed with swords and clubs. So they all come and arrest Jesus. And the question is, what do their actions show about them? Well, they come with a large crowd with soldiers or people with swords and clubs, a whole crowd of them, plus the chief priests, teachers of the law, and elders. So they not only acting illegally at night, they are acting treacherously under the cover of darkness. There's a betrayer, one of Jesus's own men, and they all come and arrest Jesus. And the interesting thing is, Jesus said, why have you come? verse 48, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me. Here's another prophecy here that he's quoting, that he's alluding to it. He doesn't quote it directly, but he's alluding to it. Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. What are those, what is the prophecy that he is alluding to? Well, in Isaiah 45, verse 19, we read the following. In Isaiah 45, verse 19, we read, I have not spoken in secret from somewhere in a land of darkness. I have not said to Jacob's descendants, seek me in vain. And then, of course, that's repeated again in Isaiah 48, verse 16. Isaiah 48, verse 16, from the first announcement, I have not spoken in secret. In the Gospel of John, John refers to this a bit more clearly. He quotes it more directly, but Jesus is speaking about the same passages in Isaiah. And he's saying that I'm fulfilling this passage in Isaiah. I've always spoken out in the open. And yet you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. What scriptures? That he is going to be betrayed, and that the people who will do it with nothing honorable in their actions. And then we read that they all deserted him and fled. They all deserted him and fled. Now, the question here in question 7 is, what does the passage teach us about Jesus and the cross? What do we need to learn and relearn and live out? Well, the first thing is that he's fulfilling prophecy. It has been prophesied. He starts in verse 27, with Mark 14, verse 27, with a prophecy from the prophet Zechariah. I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. So it's prophesied. And it's necessary for prophecy to be fulfilled. And the next thing that prophecy tells us, that it was the plan of God from the beginning. It was the plan in eternity past of both the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the plan of redemption. So Jesus is simply fulfilling prophecy, and there's only one prophecy quoted here, and the two from Isaiah, that he always spoke in secret. He always spoke in the open. He never spoke in secret. And it wasn't necessary to come out with swords and clubs, because he was there in the temple courts. They could have arrested him, or they could have accused him if he did something wrong. And also, it tells us that Jesus was obedient. Jesus obeyed the plan of God. He was willing to do whatever was required of him. Now the question is, what can we learn or relearn and live out? Well, we have to obey what God has ordained and what God has commanded. We have to listen to what God's plan is, and we must get on board with God's plan. We can't make our own plan. We have to stick to what God has ordained and what God has commanded. And as Jesus was obedient, we need to be obedient. And there's the contrast painted between Jesus, who was wide awake and praying and interceding for his life, not interceding, praying for his life and asking for the Father to pass the cup by, And on the other hand, there were the disciples that were sleeping. And the fact that they were sleeping is an indication that they've not really moved to the point where both the spirit and the body are working together. They're only concerned with the body. They want to preserve their bodies. The spirit, Jesus says, is willing, but the body is weak. The spirit is missing in their actions and in their lives at the moment. They do not really display a real faith. In fact, they display fear. And if you can remember earlier in Mark's gospel, when fear is displayed, it's a sign of unbelief. Remember when Jesus was in the boat and the storm came up and they were so afraid, he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still not believe?" So fear is a sign of unbelief. Focusing on the body and what will happen to the body and trying to preserve the body is a sign of unbelief. Sign of faith is to be ever watchful, always praying, and to be willing to submit your body to what the Spirit commands. And I want to once again stress that passage in Romans 8 verse 13 and 14, which is I think a wonderful passage to put this in Paul's words, where it says, if you live according to the body or the flesh or the sinful nature, you will die. If by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, if you mortify the deeds of the body, then you will live. Because those who are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. So if we allow the Spirit to lead us and to bend our wills and our bodies to the leading of the Spirit and to the teaching in God's word, then we will live. And Jesus, of course, is the example. And the disciples here show that they don't understand. Okay, my friends, I think that is all up. That wasn't too fast because I can't hear you, you can't speak, and you can't ask questions, so everything goes a bit quick. But if it's too quick, please let me know, and then we will try and take a bit longer next time. May the Lord be with you and bless you and keep you, and know that Jesus is with you. Keep watching and praying, stay obedient, and submit your bodies to the will of God, and let the Spirit lead you. Have a good night. Grace to you and peace.